Hi, I'm Rashonda Cade. This is Reading with Rashonda. We are reading Behind the Scenes by Elizabeth Keckley. We are on chapter 10. Chapter 10 is a long chapter. I do not believe we will make it all the way through. I'm aiming for about midway through. We'll see. We'll see how it all goes. So, chapter 10, the second inauguration. Mrs. Lincoln came to my apartments one day towards the close of the summer of 1864 to consult me in relation to a dress. And here, let me remark, I never approved of ladies attached to the presidential household coming to my rooms. Hmm. She did not approve of ladies attached to the presidential household coming to her rooms. I guess she was okay for other ladies to come to her room. Hmm. I'm intrigued. I mean, I wouldn't want people coming either. Like I wouldn't want my bosses coming to my house unless I like invited them, but I wouldn't want them just to show up and be like, "Hey, I got work for you." Let's keep reading. I always thought that it would be more consistent with their dignity to send for me and let me come to them instead of their coming to me. Is that really what she thought? It would be more consistent with their dignity, or is this one of the things that she doesn't talk about fully? I'm just over here turning on my space heater. It's a little cool up here. All right. I may have peculiar notions about some things, and this may be regarded as one of them. No matter, I have recorded my opinion. I cannot forget the associations of my early life. Well, Mrs. Lincoln came to my rooms, and as usual, she had much to say about the presidential election. After some conversation, she asked, "Lizzie, where do you think I will be this time next summer?" "Why, in the White House, of course." "I cannot believe so. I have no hope of the reelection of Mr. Lincoln. The canvass is a heated one, the people begin to murmur at the war, and every vile charge is brought against my husband." "No matter," I replied. Hang on. All right. Sorry. My space heater was like, "No, we're not going to keep going." I was like, "Yes, you are. I'm a little cool." All right. After some conversation, she asked, "Lizzie, where do you think I will be this time next summer?" Like, is she going fishing? Why is she asking this? "Why, in the White House, of course." "I cannot believe so. I have no hope of the reelection of Mr. Lincoln. The canvass is a heated one, the people begin to murmur at the war, and every vile charge is brought against my husband." "No matter," I replied. "Mr. Lincoln will be reelected. I am so confident of it that I am tempted to ask a favor of you." "Hmm. A favor? Well, if we remain in the White House, I shall be able to do you many favors. What is the special favor?" "Simply this, Mrs. Lincoln. I should like for you to make me a present of the right hand glove that the president wears at the first public reception after his second inaugural." That strikes me as terribly odd. Let's read that again. "Simply this, Mrs. Lincoln. I should like for you to make me a present of the right hand glove that the president wears at the first public reception after his second inaugural." I mean, I guess she's saying, I can't think of anything else to ask except for a token from the second inaugural celebration, but that's just weird. What's she going to do with his right hand glove? Although, like, who wouldn't give money for Michael Jackson's right hand glove, the sparkle one? All right. "You shall have it in welcome. It will be so filthy when he pulls it off, I shall be tempted to take the tongs and put it in the fire." Oh, that is his handshake glove. Hmm. Okay. What do you think about this? Like, I'm a, why would you want that? And Mrs. Lincoln already seems like she's not going to wash it ahead of time. Okay. I said like 15 times. I'm just going to keep reading. "You shall have it in welcome. It will be so filthy when he pulls it off, I shall be tempted to take the tongs and put it in the fire. I cannot imagine, Elizabeth, what you want with such a glove. I shall cherish it as a precious memento of the second inauguration of the man who has done so much for my race." Okay, I get it. I mean, I did go straight to Michael Jackson because he had a sparkle glove, but people really do like tokens of things from people and mementos, particularly famous people. And I mean, that must be something to be that closely associated with the president, President Lincoln. All right, I get it kind of. I shall cherish it as a precious memento of the second inauguration of the man who has done so much for my race. He has been a Jehovah to my people, has lifted them, not us, them, has lifted them out of bondage and directed their footsteps from darkness into light. I guess she was like I was already out of bondage. I shall keep the glove and hand it down to posterity. You have some strange ideas, Elizabeth. Never mind, you shall have the glove. That is, if Mr. Lincoln continues president after the 4th of March next. I held Mrs. Lincoln to her promise. That glove is now in my possession, bearing the marks of the thousands of hands that grasped the honest hand of Mr. Lincoln on that eventful night. Alas, it has become a prouder, sadder memento than I ever dreamed. Prior to making the request, it would be. In due time, the election came off, and all of my predictions were verified. The loyal states decided that Mr. Lincoln should continue at the nation's helm. Autumn faded, winter dragged slowly by, and still the country resounded with the clash of arms. The South was suffering, yet suffering was borne with heroic determination, and the army continued to present a bold, defiant front. With the first early breath of spring, thousands of people gathered in Washington to witness the second inauguration of Abraham Lincoln as President of the United States. And I've noticed that she said the United States. There really was a time when the U.S. was first founded that we considered ourselves as these United States, multiple states united into a country, but there came a turning point where we really started calling ourselves the United States, as in we are really one entity united. So it's interesting to me that she says the United States. It was a stirring day in the national capital, and one that will never fade from the memory of those who witnessed the imposing ceremonies. The morning was dark and gloomy. Clouds hung like a pall in the sky as if portending some great disaster. But when the president stepped forward to receive the oath of office, the clouds parted and a ray of sunshine streamed from the heavens to fall upon and gild his face. Ah! It is also said that a brilliant star was seen at noonday. It was the noonday of life with Mr. Lincoln, and the star, as viewed in the light of subsequent events, was emblematic of a summons from on high. Ooh, an omen. This was Saturday, and on Monday evening I went to the White House to dress Mrs. Lincoln for the first grand levee. While arranging Mrs. L's hair, the president came in. It was to be the first time I had seen him since the inauguration, and I went up to him, proffering my hand with words of congratulation. He grasped my outstretched hand warmly and held it while he spoke. Thank you. Well, Madam Elizabeth, he always called me Madam Elizabeth, I don't know whether I should feel thankful or not. The position brings with it many trials. We do not know what we are destined to pass through, but God will be with us all. I put my trust in God. He was not lying when he said the position brings with it many trials. Oh my goodness. That is a job I can't fathom wanting. Like, I know there are people right now, this minute, who are like, I want to be president of the United States. And there have been numerous people who have wanted that. I cannot fathom wanting that job, and the weight of the responsibility and all of the heartache that it must accompany. There is a reason that people leave that office looking very aged. Sorry, let's keep going. He dropped my hand and with solemn face walked across the room and took his seat on the sofa. Prior to this, I had congratulated Mrs. Lincoln, and she had answered with a sigh, Thank you, Elizabeth. But now that we have won the position, she's like, not he, we, but I get that too. Like, you are all in, your whole family, everybody, you are all doing this like a pastor. It's not just we're celebrating our pastor's anniversary, but I think about my pastor and pastors a lot. Like, it's not just the pastor, it's his whole family, and Everybody is serving in various ways. Thank you, Elizabeth. But now that we have won the position, I almost wish it were otherwise. Does she really? Because, like a couple chapters ago, she was talking about how deeply in debt she was and that her husband was going to find out if they didn't win. So I don't know that she really means this. But anyway, I will keep moving. Poor Mr. Lincoln is looking so heartbroken, so completely worn out. I fear he will not get through the next 4 years. Was it a presentiment that made her take a sad view of the future? News from the front was never more cheering. A presentiment is like a sixth sense, an omen, a feeling, a vision. News from the front was never more cheering. On every side, the Confederates were losing ground, and the lines of blue were advancing in triumph. As I would look out my window almost every day, I could see the artillery going past on its way to the open space of ground to fire a salute in honor of some new victory. From every point came glorious news of the success of the soldiers that fought for the Union. And yet, in their private chamber, away from the curious eyes of the world, the president and his wife wore sad, anxious faces. I finished dressing Mrs. Lincoln, and she took the president's arm and went below. It was one of the largest receptions ever held in Washington. Thousands crowded the halls and rooms of the White House, eager to shake Mr. Lincoln by his hand and receive a gracious smile from his wife. Notice that they are receiving together. I mean, it is inauguration time, but we had the whole hubbub with the ladies who used to be in the receiving line with President Lincoln. Many colored people were in Washington, and large numbers had desired to attend the levee, but orders were issued not to admit them. Black folk can't go. A gentleman, a member of Congress, on his way to the White House, recognized Mr. Frederick Douglass, the eloquent colored orator, on the outskirts of the crowd. How do you do, Mr. Douglass? A fearful jam tonight. You are going in, of course. No, that is no to your last question. Not going in to shake the president by hand? Why, pray? The best reason in the world. Strict orders have been issued not to admit people of color. It's a shame, Mr. Douglass, that you should thus be placed under ban. Never mind, wait here and I will see what can be done. And I imagine that the person he's speaking with is saying, it's a shame that you, in particular, Mr. Frederick Douglass, should not be thus placed under, that should be placed under this ban. I don't think he's saying it's a shame all the black folk can't come in, but you're a special black folk. And that's a thing that is still around today. You're not like other black people, or you're special, or whatever. Like taking the individual and saying, I like you, but I don't like black people generally, which is madness. I mean, I'm not saying everybody has to like everybody, but like if you can like one black person, why would you think that you couldn't like more black people? Black people, like all people, are people. As individuals, we have our good things and our bad things, but like you can like a person. So go ahead, like people, regardless of what their race or ethnicity or whatever is. Just like the people. The gentleman entered the White House and, working his way to the president, asked permission to introduce Mr. Douglass to him. Certainly, said Mr. Lincoln. Bring Mr. Douglass in by all means. How does she know this? Like, how is she recording this conversation for us? Was she there? Like, she also being a colored person wasn't allowed to go into the levee? Okay, I got questions. I don't doubt that this happened, and I don't doubt that she knows that it happened. I'm really just curious, how did you find out? Who told you? Did Mrs. Lincoln tell you? Did one of the ladies who talk smack about Mrs. Lincoln all the time tell you? Did Mr. Lincoln tell you? Did Frederick Douglass tell you? Did you see it happen? Wow, okay. How do you know this, ma'am? All right, certainly, said Mr. Lincoln. Bring Mr. Douglass in by all means. I shall be glad to meet him. The gentleman returned, and soon Mr. Douglass stood face to face with the president. So if black people were banned from going into the party, and then whoever this white gentleman was went and talked with the president and said, "Hey, Frederick Douglass is out here. I would like for you to meet him. Can I bring him in?" And the president said yes. Obviously, whoever the people are who are not letting the black people in are going to allow in the black person that the president says can come in. But how did that happen? Like today, we would have, the president's right hand person, press secretary, I don't know who, somebody who can speak on behalf of the president would send a message or talk on, the little earpiece or something and say, this one person can come in, let them through. But we didn't have that sort of instantaneous communication here. Did people just take it on the word of this one gentleman? And that's what Keckley calls him, so that's what I'm calling him. Of this one guy that the president said it was okay, so they all just let the black guy pass. Ooh, pass. That's interesting. How did he get in? What happened? Did they have to have a whole heated conversation at various checkpoints along the way? The president said he wants to meet him. Like, did the president have to come out from where he was? Okay. Like, I'm really curious about how this happened. And did Frederick Douglass say to all of his other friends, "Hey, we're all allowed in, not just me, all the blacks. We all can come in." Like, what? Okay. The gentleman returned, and soon Mr. Douglass stood face to face with the president. Mr. Lincoln pressed his hand warmly, saying, "Mr. Douglass, I am glad to meet you. I have long admired your course, and I value your opinions highly." Mr. Douglass was very proud of the manner in which Mr. Lincoln received him. On leaving the White House, he came to a friend's house where a reception was being held, and he related the incident with great pleasure to myself and others. Ah, that is how she knew. She was at another party, and Frederick Douglass showed up and talked about this. Okay, that makes sense to me now. On the Monday following the reception at the White House, everybody was busy preparing for the grand inaugural ball to come off that night. I was in Mrs. Lincoln's room with the greater portion of the day. While dressing her that night, the president came in, and I remarked to him how much Mr. Douglass had been pleased on the night he was presented to Mr. Lincoln. Mrs. L. at once turned to her husband with the inquiry, "Father, why was not Mr. Douglass introduced to me?" "I do not know. I thought he was presented." But he was not. "It must have been an oversight then, mother. I am sorry you did not meet him." When President Lincoln said, "I thought he was presented," it was customary to present people as they entered. "This is Senator and Mrs. Thus and Such of the great state of thus and so," and then they would come in. So I guess President Lincoln assumed that he had come in and been presented that way, which makes sense because we don't know exactly what the gentleman said to the president. Just asked permission to introduce Mr. Douglass to him. Didn't ask permission, "Can Mr. Douglass come in?" Even though he's one of the coloreds. He was just like, "Can I introduce you to Frederick Douglass?" "Sure." Okay. "It must have been an oversight then, mother. I am sorry you did not meet him." I finished dressing her for the ball and accompanied her to the door. She was dressed magnificently and entered the ballroom leaning on the arm of Senator Sumner, a gentleman that she very much admired. What? She wasn't with President Lincoln and we had all of the hubbub earlier? What? Come on. Mr. Lincoln walked into the ballroom accompanied by two gentlemen. So she's walking in on the arm of Senator Sumner, who obviously was a man at this point in history. And Mr. Lincoln walked in accompanied by two gentlemen. This is funny to me. This ball closed the season. It was the last time that the president and his wife ever appeared in public. Some days after, Mrs. Lincoln, with a party of friends, went to City Point on a visit. Mrs. Lincoln had returned to Washington prior to the 2nd of April. On Monday, April 3rd, Mrs. Secretary Harlan came into my room with material for a dress. While conversing with her, I saw artillery pass the window, and as it was on its way to fire a salute, I inferred that good news had been received by the War Department. My reception room was on one side of the street and my workroom on the other. Inquiring the cause of the demonstration, we were told that Richmond had fallen. Mrs. Harlan took one of my hands in each of her own, and we rejoiced together. I ran across to my workroom and on entering it discovered that the girls in my employ also had heard the good news. They were particularly elated as it was reported that the rebel capital had surrendered to colored troops. Okay. Oh, 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 oh. I had promised my employees a holiday when Richmond should fall, and now that Richmond had fallen, they reminded me of my promise. I'm gonna no, I'm gonna keep reading. That's not a fantastic place to stop, but I don't feel like there really is. I'll read a little bit more. I recrossed to my reception room, and Mrs. Harlan told me that the good news was enough for her. She could afford to wait for her dress and to give the girls a holiday and a treat by all means. She returned to her house, and I joined my girls in the joy of the long promised holiday. We wandered about the streets of the city with happy faces and hearts overflowing with joy. The clerks in the various departments also enjoyed a holiday, and they improved it by getting gloriously fuddled. Gloriously drunk they got, gloriously fuddled. Towards evening, I saw S and many other usually clear headed men in the street in a confused, uncertain state of mind. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Where the people are out in the streets celebrating Richmond has fallen to a group of colored soldiers at that, and they are getting gloriously fuddled, or as we would say, drunk. So, we are reading Behind the Scenes by Elizabeth Keckley. I'm Rashonda Cade, and this is Reading with Rashonda.